Hello, everybody, and welcome to the World Discord Podcast. I'm Brian Endless.
I'm Joel Ostrow. How are you, Brian? It looks like you were more right than I was in our last episode so far.
What did we talk about in our last
The
episode?
region has not responded and attacked Israel yet.
Yep. So kind of interesting to see where that one goes. We'll do another show on Iran, unfortunately, soon is my guess, because we're going to need to update things, but no one still knows what's happening over there.
No.
There's still a lot of things in doubt. Today, though, we are going to domestic discord, and the thing that was most in the news until the Iranian attacks happened is immigration, and in particular ICE and United States enforcement of immigration. Many people believe that ICE is going overboard in a wide variety of ways in the way they are enforcing immigration. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't want proper immigration laws enforced in proper ways, but the question is this being done correctly? Is this being done with due process? And then we've got a lot of protests that are going on, a lot of people very upset about it. And we've got a great guest to help us talk about that today. So Joel, why don't you introduce him?
Thank you so much, Brian. Really been looking forward to this conversation. We're joined by Mayor Rory Hoskins. He's mayor of Forest Park. For anyone watching who doesn't know where Forest Park is, it's a suburb of Chicago, just west of Oak Park, where Brian and I are located. And thought that it might be useful to hear from a local elected official about just the challenges and how they're thinking about uh, responses to and the problems surrounding the actions of the federal government these days. And while I'm not aware, and perhaps you can let us know, Mr. Mayor, if Forest Park has had any incursions by ICE at this point, certainly the worry must be there. So I think I'd just like to open with a real general question for you. How do these circumstances enter into your everyday thinking as an elected official? How much is it on your mind? How central is it? And then we can go from there.
Sure. So almost from the first day that the current president took office, and started amping up the rhetoric about ICE enforcement and mass deportations and whatnot, people were scared. Forest Park is a very diverse town. Let me just explain a little bit about Forest Park. So we are, like you said, 9 miles from the loop, 10 miles from the loop, just west of Oak Park. So we're nestled in between Oak Park, Maywood, North Riverside, and River Forest. We don't have a huge population of Latinos per se, but because of where we are, right, we're in the middle of a pretty progressive area. We have a lot of traffic, we have a lot of restaurants, and so we do have people who probably could be susceptible to maybe overzealous ICE enforcement. Over the years that I've lived in Forest Park, my family's been here since 1999. I've gotten to know a lot of people, business owners, regular restaurants. I know for a fact that there are some undocumented people living in Forest Park.
For sure.
And they don't cause any particular problems. They just happen to not be documented. So going back to where we were in January, some of our residents were really scared, rightfully so. And I don't just mean Latinos. I mean people who are just good people. They worry about their neighbors. They worry about their loved ones. We didn't know what to expect. Now, even before President Trump was elected, we had issues with migrants coming to Forest Park just like they were coming to Chicago. They were being sent by the governor of Texas and other governors possibly, and we had a couple of busloads end up in Forest Park. And in those cases, we tried to feed and clothe the people as best we could. On one particular instance, we had a bus pull up to the Blue Line terminal that ends in Forest Park at 7-Eleven
Mhm.
Des Plaines.
Yeah.
We got word that they were there, so our police officers went there and told the bus driver that he had to take them to the landing pad in Chicago where they had better resources. We've reached out to groups like Salvation Army and other groups that were serving migrants. And we also have a relationship with a community organization driven by Spanish speakers. It's called PASO,
Hmm.
uh, which is West Suburban Action Project, but that's the Spanish
Hmm.
acronym, right? I'm not a fluent Spanish speaker. I'd mangle it. But anyway, the West Suburban Action Project, they contacted us pretty much as soon as President Trump took office. Business owners contacted us. Our Chamber of Commerce uh, contacted us, and we began a series of Know Your Rights sort of programming where we put that literature on our website. We worked with Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights and published some of their literature and on our website and distributed it in places in Forest Park. Have we had ICE directly in Forest Park? Not that I know of. On a couple of occasions, some very, again, maybe overzealous people posted on Facebook
Mm.
indicating that ICE was in the community, but our police officers have never confirmed that ICE was in this community specifically. They've been instructed to do so, and we've informed all of our businesses and all the stakeholders that Illinois Trust Act governs how Forest Park police officers will respond to incidents involving ICE or immigration issues and whatnot. So we're not here to do the work of federal government for them, um, but we want everyone to know their rights.
So that's fantastic in terms of showing us the complexity, because I don't think most people see this. There's an amazing amount of interaction and coordination that's been going on, and especially in the cities that had the busloads of immigrants, as you're saying, coming up from the south. Chicago just couldn't handle them, so sent them to neighboring towns that were willing to take some. Neighboring towns got overloaded and couldn't take them. There was a lot of work back and forth, a lot of nonprofits, non-governmentals working in that was excellent. Can you tell us what the Trust Act is for those who don't know?
Yeah.
The Trust Act is state legislation that basically says that under Illinois law, local law enforcement will not do the job of immigration and customs enforcement officers. So, we don't assist ICE in serving warrants. If there's a criminal act occurring or if there's a criminal warrant that's been issued by a judge, only then would our police officers get involved. But it's basically state law that says immigration is responsible. It's the responsibility of federal authorities.
Got it. Thank you. And
I want
again,
to. Can I follow up directly on that point? And it might be a much larger discussion.
you know what, Joel, let me clarify real quick, just for those not fully keeping
Yeah.
up, because I know we're all on top of this. That judicial warrant, that bench warrant, is important because ICE almost always comes with an administrative warrant, which just comes from an ICE desk and doesn't have the force of law. And Illinois law says they have to have a fully legal warrant coming from a judge. So again, that's a great point. Joel, go
Well,
ahead.
yeah, and then for anyone like ICE is detaining people, uh, really without we know all we've all seen the videos that citizens have taken of these incidents. They're detaining citizens, immigrants who are legal, immigrants who are here without documentation. Um, the question I have following up from your point about police mayor is, and I know that Brian, because we're both quite active on this question, when a masked group of people take a human being and put them in chains or zip ties or cuffs, put them in a car, and refuse to show either a warrant or identification, by both state law, federal law, international human rights law, that's called kidnapping or right forced rendition, right? Illegal rendition. That's a crime. If police are dedicated to uh, arresting those who commit crimes, I know you're mayor of Forest Park, not of Los Angeles, but your perspective has certainly got to be different than ours. Why are the police not enforcing the law? Because there are police officers present in those situations. Often, we again see that on video, and they're not upholding the law.
Yeah, I can't really. Yeah, I don't have enough information to comment on those incidents, right? I don't know if there are prior relationships between some of these federal law enforcement people, and maybe they've identified themselves to local cops, and now they're wearing masks in public. I don't know the answers to that. It hasn't happened in Forest Park, fortunately. Hopefully, it doesn't become common in Chicago. I mean, we've certainly seen. Broadview has a detention center, right? Broadview is not far at all from Forest Park.
Yeah.
Well,
It's a different community. So I'm not, yeah, I've never actually been to the facility. Um, so it's unfortunate that federal police are masking themselves. And hopefully um, some judge will, put a stop to that or help them to reform some of those aspects of their enforcement. It's unfortunate that I've heard interviews where people in the Trump administration say that their goal is to um, hurt people, not
yeah,
physically hurt people, but hurt people emotionally, to put people in fear.
Oh
yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
Part of what they want to do, right? And that's why we have to resist. We had a very vigorous No Kings rally here in Forest Park a couple of weeks ago. I mean, people really did want to express themselves, so we were right out there on Madison Street. They had a larger one in Oak Park, but it was the first time that Forest Park had engaged in that kind of activity.
yeah,
We're a town, ironically, that used to be considered a sundown town, right? Like it
yep,
wasn't even welcoming
Yeah.
to Black Americans.
yeah,
And here we are now with me serving as mayor.
yeah,
If you go on our Madison Street, you'll see Juneteenth banners and you'll see Pride
yeah,
banners. We had a
Yep.
Pride festival. So anyway, Forest Park is a welcoming community. We certainly wouldn't want to see masked law enforcement officers here. We have a really professional police force that works with people. We have bilingual officers who can speak Spanish, who can speak Polish, who can speak
yeah.
Arabic.
As do we in Oak Park, as you know.
Yeah.
Do you know? I mean, I know you can only speak for Forest Park, but more generally, like I refer to our police, right, in our community, Oak Park, Brian's and mine, but I consider Forest Park to be part of our community. River
Oh yeah.
Forest, like we're one, like I know how I would hope that our police officers would respond if they witnessed a situation like this, but I don't know how they would respond. Do you have a sense? Like, and there's always going to be a difference between what's communicated and then what happens. It seems like the communication was you don't assist, but in a scenario like that where someone is asking to see a warrant, asking to see ID, and is detained without any of that, do you have a sense of how Oak Park or Forest Park or River Forest police would respond in that kind of a situation? So if they went into a restaurant and, for example, and hauled somebody out, or a school, or
Let me ask it a little differently too, Mr.
okay,
Mayor. Is this something that you've talked with your police about and they have instructions?
better
Or is
further
it something
question.
you've talked with other communities? See, I have to
Yeah.
clarify for Joel. Sometimes he's not always right in there. Or is this something you've talked with your neighboring communities about and leaders of other communities? What's the discussion that's out there at your level?
So in Forest Park, we wrote out very clear guidance for our police officers really early in 2025, instructing them that the Trust Act governs here, and that we're not here to do immigration enforcement work. Um, we haven't had any masked officers show up. I haven't specifically discussed that with the police chief. Um, I would expect that they would conduct themselves professionally, and they're just not here to do an immigration work, right?
Yeah.
They're not here to enforce that kind of stuff. Maybe there's a special character of federal enforcement that's out there doing the work. Um, I know there's been aggressive enforcement in Chicago, but we just haven't seen it here. Am I talking to the other mayors about it? Yes. Do the mayors have varying opinions? Yes. Are Forest Park, Oak Park, and River Forest, closely connected? Yes. Our police work together all the time.
Yeah.
They use some of the same equipment. Um, we're part of a common dispatch
Yeah.
center, and we do have a very professional set of police officers. So they have to judge every case individually. Um, but like I said, thank goodness that hasn't happened here, and hopefully um, we won't see that kind of heavy-handed policing within our borders. But they actually refer to this area, the Oak Park River Forest Park community, as the Tri-Village area. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of people refer to it that way. So we are close. I talk to the mayors all the time. I was with both mayors of Oak Park and River Forest last week on multiple occasions. So.
Great. Yeah, and
Your
understand
sense?
it. It's a hard one to answer. It's a hard hypothetical.
Yeah, it is. And I would assume, and I know you sort of alluded to it. The police departments and the police chiefs also communicate with each other, and they must also be, if not gaming, discussing scenarios around this. I would imagine. Are you aware of that, or
Uh, I
not
really
the
haven't.
contents? Just are they?
Yeah,
Do you know that they're actually
they talk
discussing?
all the time.
Yeah.
They talk all the time.
No.
Yeah. So, what have you been hearing from your constituents? You mentioned
No.
No King's Day. What are some of the concerns that people have? Are they more general? Are there specific concerns out there? And that may include things like, do you know of sanctuary churches or other sanctuary organizations that tend to have special concerns in your village? And what are those?
There's a very active community in some of the churches that's been working with migrants to find them shelter, find other services, to place them in jobs, and this has been ongoing since before um, you know the current president was inaugurated in January. Um, One that comes to mind is St. Giles and Oak Park. I mean, they have
Yep.
a really active group that's been working to, like I said, find housing and things. And there are members of St. Giles who live in Forest Park who I've
Of
talked
course.
to
Hmm.
about the work that they're doing. Um, the mayor of Oak Park famously responded to migrants showing up in Oak Park, and they got them settled outside of a police facility. And I think her church, Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Oak Park, temporarily housed, and then they called the Carlton Hotel and got the Carlton involved. I mean, Oak Park has a lot more resources than Forest Park.
Sure.
And like I said, in our case, at one point I was told that migrants were sleeping in houses that were under construction that were being rehabbed.
Hmm.
In some cases, it was part of a labor agreement, right? They were doing the work there during the day. They were able to sleep there at night. Did I witness it with my own eyes? No. Did I
Hmm.
talk to the police chief about it and tell them to certainly be on guard? Yes.
Hmm.
So you hear a lot of things anecdotally. I hear of other families that may have a loved one who's undocumented, while the majority of people in the household are documented. And again, they're scared, right? They people are generally coming here for a better life, right? Are there people undocumented working on, you know, in the restaurants in town? Possibly, right? So I mean, I think people are rightfully in fear for their long-term well-being, and that's the purpose of what these raids are doing. They want people to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And they want people who are allied to some of the migrant or immigrant community to also feel uneasy, and people do feel uneasy, right? I hear it all the time.
Let me stop us here for a second for a quick unpaid advertisement because you've mentioned restaurants a few times. In my mind, Forest Park has one of the best restaurant rows in the Chicago
Yeah.
area on Madison, and
For
I
sure.
strongly recommend it for anyone who hasn't been there. But also, I don't know of many restaurants in the United States that don't have some undocumented workers. The system would go down.
Yep.
The restaurant and farming systems would go down without undocumented workers. People need to realize that.
Yeah, and what do you hear from business owners, chambers of commerce, those types? What's their level of concern?
It
What are they
varies.
doing to prepare? Like,
It,
do
it,
you?
it really varies, Joel. I mean, I'll give you
Yeah,
an example. We have Ferrara Candy Factory in town, right?
yeah,
They use a lot of temporary workers,
yeah.
so we talked to them. some of their employees are Spanish speaking or mainly Spanish speaking. So we have great relationships with Ferraro. We have a large McAdams landscaping company.
Yeah.
They have a lot of Spanish speaking employees. Farmington Foods in the area has Spanish speaking employees, and other places, like I said, smaller businesses along Madison. So we check in with the business owners, and
And I know, Brian, you this issue is, there's a general fear, Mayor, as you point out, right? And I like how you put that. I have a lot of Spanish speaking students, Latina students. Brian, I know you do, and
Absolutely.
and the level of fear, of palpable fear, and these are people who were born in Chicago area, born in Aurora, born in Joliet, born in DuPage County or Cook County, born in Cicero, who are scared of being hauled away because of how they look, because of how they speak. And it is on a level which is horrifying. That doesn't, it's so far, the post 9/11 environment for Muslim students doesn't even compare to the level of fear that I see now. And that level of fear made me cry almost on a daily basis, that people were experiencing that. That's why I asked about, like, what kinds of concerns are you hearing from business owners, or and how do you go about reassuring, what's your role as a mayor in the face of that fear among residents, citizens, residents of your town, and business owners, workers? What do you
well,
do?
different people expect different things from Village Hall, right? So I try
Yeah.
to be a good listener. Um,
Mhm.
like I said, I try to check in with some of the businesses periodically. Um, if I see a post on Facebook saying that ICE is in town, then maybe I call up a few of the business owners and say, "Hey, how are things going? This is what we're hearing." Um, I mean, we're certainly here to enforce the laws, and I don't want to suggest to anyone that
Absolutely.
a governmental entity is going to do anything that's inconsistent with the law.
Right.
But we also want people to feel safe and to have correct information and to know their rights. So we're going to make sure that everyone knows their rights. I've asked the business owners to alert me um, if they experience anything out of the ordinary, and they all tend to have my cell phone. Um, we text, we talk. They have the cell numbers of some of the um, department heads in town who can also address their needs or get to me quickly. Um, and so again, I'm a sounding board. Um,
Yeah.
I'll advance their priorities with policy leaders at different levels, right? Whether it's talking to county government, whether it's talking to the sheriff's office, whether it's talking to our representatives in Springfield. But when you're the mayor of a small town, you have a lot of different roles and different hats you wear depending
Yep.
on who you are.
Sure. Yeah, in some
And
ways, it must be harder than being a mayor of a big city, right? You, you're confronting some of the same problems, but without all the resources that a larger city will have.
yeah, and you're kind of describing the comforter in chief role too, which
Yeah.
I don't often think of in that way. Mr. Mayor, do you have any many immigrants who are not Spanish speaking or who are documented Spanish speaking? Because I deal with a lot of immigration cases. Mine are mostly out of Africa that I work as a witness on, and I know a lot of people just who are in the system are afraid because now ICE and Homeland Security are taking people out of the system when they walk into court for their legal court appointments, and they're trying to take people who are here completely legally with full paperwork off the streets.
Yeah.
Have you
Temporary protective status is gone for some of those.
100%? Yeah. Have you had any local concerns or local issues with that? I think probably concerns from what you're describing.
So Forest Park is about 30% non-black and non-white, right? So that's a lot of immigrants, whether it's Latinos or Asians or people who are maybe a mix of different ethnic or minority groups. And so we have medical students studying at Loyola, or nurses who speak different languages, right? Maybe Filipino, or Tagalog speaking nurses, right? Or other ethnicities. And I think the general climate that indicates hostility um, to immigrants has people on edge.
Yeah.
I've talked to some families who are Latino, but who are here, they're citizens, right? And at first, they weren't at all sympathetic to the migrants because the way they see it. Let me back up. So let's say you have immigrants whose parents came from Mexico. They're citizens. They didn't necessarily see a kinship with Venezuelans.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just being very blunt. This is stuff I've
Sure.
heard from some of the activists. And so initially, and some of the communities, not just Forest Park, but some of the proviso communities where they
Yeah.
have large Mexican American populations, they weren't that interested in working with Venezuelan migrants. But after seeing how the current administration um, is enforcing their view of immigration regulation, um, they do feel a certain kinship and sympathy now to the Venezuelans, because it seems like if you have an accent and you're a brown person, then you might um, draw suspicion among ICE. So people who 4 or 5 months ago weren't at all sympathetic are now very sympathetic.
So that's interesting. It sounds like what you're saying here, and I wanted to ask something like this. It sounds like this is drawing people together, like it is bringing people together around the mutual problems that the federal government is creating for a lot of people here. Is that accurate from what you've seen?
Yes, it is, Brian. Yes, it is.
Oh, you should do a project on that, Brian. He's got another side gig called the Come Together Project, which is aims to
Bringing
bring
people
things
together.
happen. Yeah.
We have a member of the Park District in Forest Park who's a very avid member of Indivisible,
Mm-hmm.
and this person is from South America,
Mm-hmm.
and has emerged as something of an activist. Um, was very involved in No Kings. Was very involved in the Resist rally several months ago, the really big one in the Loop. And so she has been a real link to some of the really the front lines grassroots organizations like Paso and others that are actually doing the work out there. And so she alerts us to some of the communications and some of the fears in the community.
Have there been protests or demonstrations in Forest Park? I know there have been in Oak Park. Um,
You said there was no Kings last week. Have there been others besides that?
was there no Kings in Forest Park?
There was no Kings in Forest Park. Someone took a permit. They lined up at Constitution Court. There were probably a little bit over 100 people, which is um, a nice little clog up for Madison Street, right? A two
Yeah.
lane two lane road. All ages, all colors, all shapes, all sizes, all levels of mobility. But yeah, people expressed themselves that day.
What's your role, assuming there's going to be more of those? How does that have an impact on the work you do? Your role um, in light of all of this,
Well, on that day, I joined the No Kings rally to show that their values were consistent with my values. And they had a permit,
Mhm.
and they didn't cause any trouble, right? They didn't block traffic. On a couple occasions, we may have asked people to get out of the street to make sure that they didn't block traffic or for their own safety. Um, and so like I said, the role kind of varies according to needs to enforce certain things. I guess I'd say that, Joel. I don't think there'd been any other rallies. We have other forms of protest, right?
Yeah.
There's been public art that expresses um, solidarity with immigrants. We have a large public art facility on Circle Bridge, and a
Yeah.
while back, someone did a mural with the quote, um, "No human is illegal," right?
Hmm.
And someone continuously vandalized that public art installation, and it was repaired probably 6 times. Eventually,
Wow.
our police officers installed a hidden camera
Mm.
they would see the culprit defacing the mural. They eventually caught him, and he was prosecuted. Right, so that speaks to how Forest Park has evolved somewhat and wants to have people feel safe. So, whether it's the school district, our K through 8, District 91, we have very good people serving on that board, people of conscience. They actually begin their meetings with a statement acknowledging that Forest Park sits on land that used to belong to the First Nations, right? That's the level of sensibility in District 91.
Mm-hmm.
Our District 209 board, it governs all of Proviso. It's not quite as activist. Um, there are what you would probably consider some left-leaning members of the board. The current superintendent is his parents are from India, and as in in Asia, right, South Asia. So I think he's very sympathetic to immigrant issues, but they're not quite as activist as maybe some of the boards are at the local level.
Are they worried about issues when school starts up again in the fall? Or you
I
did?
believe they are. I believe they are. I think they want everyone to know their rights.
Uh-huh.
You know, communities like Maywood have
Yeah.
large populations.
Yeah, you're talking proviso.
Oh yeah.
Heck, yeah.
Broadview, well, not so much Broadview, right? But Bellwood,
Yeah.
growing numbers of Latin American
Yeah.
descended families. Melrose Park, right? They all serve the Proviso. They're all served by the Proviso school districts. What I'm saying.
Right. You may not know this, but just asking in case, you know, if they've done any practical training. That's one of the things we got at the university level at Loyola, at least, was we got a memo down and then some brief training on what to do if ICE shows up. They haven't showed up on our campus yet, but we had some basic training on that.
I don't know for certain. I can tell you that PASO, the group that I mentioned earlier, West Suburban Action Project, they've been rooted in Proviso for years. And they had strong relationships with members of the District 209 board. Um, I have every reason to expect that those relationships are still there. And because we have a very active teachers union, serving the District 209 group, um, I know that there are existing relationships. So I think the teachers know the rights. I think that the families tend to know their rights. But I really haven't asked them in terms of what they've done in terms of training.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's one thing to know your rights, but it's another thing to sort of do situational training, right?
Mhm.
And certainly school teachers, administrators, security personnel are very familiar with sort of gaming out and training for different scenarios, right? That the lockdown drills that happen, way too frequently than they should have to, right? Um, and it's a really good point, Brian. Like it seems like at least in districts like you described, like 209, it's like one would hope that people would train for the eventuality if it should happen of what to say and how to behave if.
The District 91 superintendent is a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Alvarez,
Uh-huh.
and she worked in CPS before she came to Forest Park. She's been superintendent here, I want to say, since 2021.
Okay.
I know that she has close relationships with CPS still,
Hmm.
and I know she's very much, concerned with, immigration issues. And so, again, my guess is that staff and the schools have been instructed on how to handle eventualities. I just,
Yeah.
yeah, I just haven't confirmed it. That's all.
This may be above. As you were talking, I was thinking, we're in Illinois. We've got a governor who is very uh, principled and outspoken, um, uncompromising on protecting people's rights, citizens and non-citizens alike, residents of Illinois. He always uses that phrase, residents of Illinois, people who, if you are in Illinois, we're going to keep you safe. He says things like that on a daily basis, multiple times a day. Um, do you know, like, and this would be more relevant to people in Chicago perhaps than Forest Park, but what is the relationship between the governor and the state police on matters like this? What's the relationship between the governor and Illinois National Guard units? I know there's I guess there's a difference between what it's supposed to be and what it is, but what do you know about how that's supposed to all work?
And to take that one further, what's the relationship between your local police
And
and
then
those
that,
organizations? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so the police are part of, there's a Illinois Association of Police Chiefs, right?
yeah,
There's a West Suburban Police Chiefs Association. Um, so law enforcement, they certainly talk among themselves. There's a there are various mutual aid societies, right, among police as well as fire. Um, I would have to assume that Illinois State Police will conduct themselves consistent with what the governor's instructed, right, in terms of policy. So I wouldn't expect to see them, you know, getting involved in ICE type incidents. It's just really inconceivable to me. Do our police
right,
officers talk to state police? Absolutely. Um, the sheriff, Tom Dart, is a pretty progressive sheriff. He's been out here several times. I mean, we have a personal relationship. We have each other's cell phones.
Mm.
I've had him meet with our chief of police, and he'll bring out his team. We all patrol the blue line at the end, the terminal that brings a lot of traffic to Forest Park. So there's just a lot of communication. I mean, the same way that you're familiar with Madison Street, right? Law
yeah,
enforcement officers know law enforcement officers, whether it's in Oak Park or River
Right.
Forest or North Riverside. And so I think that the tone is set at the top, and right now Governor Pritzker has indicated his values, and we expect law enforcement to act accordingly.
Have you had any communications from the federal government, or is that not going down to the local level so much?
I have not, but we're such a small community that I mean, we get like grants from the federal government, things like that.
Right.
But I mean, my contact with the federal government is Congressman Danny Davis.
Sure.
So he knows our concerns. We talk to his staff all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, also, I was at something the other day where Congresswoman Delia Ramirez was there, and we see employees of Congressman Chuy Garcia. So, and it's all very fluid, right?
Interesting. Um, let's take it up to Joel. I think I might have a good final question. You have anything else you want to talk about beforehand?
no, it's just as you were talking about whether it's images from California or New York, we see often enough police in those states and those cities who have very progressive governors or mayors. Um, it looks like there's more instances of collaboration with the feds, with the ICE. I don't even want to call them feds because we don't know who these people are because they don't show IDs and they are masked. I'm not convinced that they aren't some people who recently received pardons. And until evidence comes to the contrary, I'm going to go with that because in this case, guilty until proven innocent. They're breaking the law every hour as it is. They're
Mr.
violating the
Mayor, Mr.
Constitution.
Mayor, you'll have to excuse Joel for a minute. Regular
Yeah.
listeners to the show know he can go to the conspiracy theory side once in a while.
I'm witnessing that. I'm not.
Yeah,
I
well,
agree with him.
but I mean,
It's your show, so you keep talking.
it walks like a duck and talks like a duck. That's all I'm saying. But there have been too many instances where it looks like the police in those states and cities are cooperating with ICE rather than protecting the residents, as it were. So that was what triggered. And then I don't know what kind of response I'm looking for. It's just a concern I have. Whenever I hear the governor speak, and I have so much respect for him and his policies, it just makes me wonder. Is why we wanted to have you on and to talk about like at what level are you guys communicating and worried about things like
I
this?
think California is an outlier, right? What we saw in California, fortunately, that's the only state where the president has felt the need to nationalize, right, the National Guard and take them over. Does he probably want authority to do it elsewhere. Yes. Is Illinois preparing? Yes. I mean, I think we've heard various, you know, Senator Duckworth is, raising the alarm about what could come.
She sure is.
Um,
Yep.
and she doesn't really hold back in
Mm.
expressing her opinions, right? She's a little bit more robust on Twitter than I would be. Um, but in all seriousness, I mean, the local officials arrested in Newark, that was crazy.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen a lot of that, right? So
Senator in California, right?
yeah, yeah. But like I said, I think California is kind of an outlier. I mean, we're all. I'm personally disappointed with a lot of the things that the federal government's doing with the administration's stance. Um, but as a local official, we have to act within the law. We take an oath to support the Constitution of the United States, right?
Yeah.
And we also take an oath to support the Constitution of the state of Illinois. So my expectation is that all of our officials will conduct themselves with respect for people, whether they're documented or undocumented. Um, we don't want people living in fear. Unfortunately, we know people are living in fear.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm thankful that we have, very progressive leadership in this state, and I think they've done an admirable job of, preparing people for what might come. Right. So.
Excellent. Let me close out with one question, Mayor Hoskins. And we usually end with a what would you do, wave your magic wand to fix this, but I'm not going to put you in that situation because I don't think there's a wand big enough to do it. Where do you think this might end? Because you brought up the great points that this is to cause fear. The intent here is to cause fear. That it's
Yeah.
happening. We see people living that way, and we need to help those people as much as we can. You also mentioned, do you think that the courts are going to be able to put an end to this, or where do your hopes lie on that?
I certainly do hope that the courts will intervene and stop some of the worst impulses of this administration. Um, I think I read today that they've said, the federal government cannot revoke Harvard's ability to admit international students, right? So that's an
Right.
example of one for the good guys, so to speak.
Yeah.
Will we win every conflict in the courts? Probably not. Um,
And will the administration follow the courts, right?
well, I mean,
The question.
Kilmar Obrego, he's now out of detention, right?
Right.
Yep.
And the other young student, I can't think of his name right now, he was released.
Yep.
Khalil, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I tend to be an optimist.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, look, I'm a black mayor. I'm the descendant of slaves. We just celebrated Juneteenth. It took a hell of a long time to get Juneteenth recognized as a
Yeah.
federal holiday. Um, so do I believe that there are lots of good people in this country? Yes. Do I believe there are lots of bad people in this country? Unfortunately, right now they're screaming louder and
Yeah.
they're buying guns. Um, but again, I tend to be an optimist, and elections matter, right? So hopefully we'll organize. I think there's a lot of buyer's remorse in terms of people who voted for the current president. Um, I was reading today he did better among Latinos than I think Biden had done, and better than Hillary had done
Mm.
against Kamala Harris. And do I think there's buyer's remorse? Absolutely. Do I hope that the party organizes? I mean, I'm elected on a nonpartisan basis.
Yeah.
Right? I vote Democrat, and I identify with the Democratic Party. So do I hope that my party does a better job of organizing and taking back the legislative chamber so that we can put a block on some of these bad impulses? Absolutely. Um, we're all looking at the big ugly bill, right? Um, and hoping that the courts can maintain their authority to issue injunctions and protect our institutions. Right now we're at a bad point, um, but we're still a democracy, and I'm happy to have had the opportunity to discuss these things with you. Um, but yeah, I have faith in our system. and I have faith in people's ability to organize. Right, we saw that in the massive rallies on No King's Day. This guy was
Absolutely.
having a big birthday parade, but across the country, people were organizing and protesting, and hopefully registering to vote.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it, and wish you the best in your village. And may ice stay out is probably the.
I'm going to endorse your advertisement on Madison Street. You're welcome to come
Excellent.
send me up. Even
Mayor,
off
thank you
Madison
so much.
Street. Thank you, Joel. Thank you,
I'm a
Brian.
big fan of yours, and continued success in your career. Looking for great things. So
Absolutely.
thank you
Thanks
for
for
joining us. Everyone, thanks for watching and listening. Please like and share. Spread the word about the World Discord podcast and what the hell, the Come Together Project too, while we're at it. And until next time, thank you.
Take care, folks.